Welcome. Today's post is Pro Wrestling Decoded. Published on June 9, 2023. Ever hear of Kamala Harris? No, not that one, there is another. Here are the topics we'll be decoding today. You can always find this list in the description below. If you enjoy this video, please press the like button and subscribe for weekly full-length blog posts and shorter, more shareable videos. Let's begin. When decoding a big subject like this, the entry point is critical. The best place to start is usually the beginning of whenever the subject became globally relevant. That's almost always going to be where you find the easiest establishing comms for anything. When it comes to pro wrestling, there is only one figure that fits this bill. Bruno Sammartino, the original WWF champion. Longest title reign in WWE history. Despite how unknown this guy probably is for the younger generations, the comms for what he represented is easy. It's also clear why he has become largely forgotten, but we'll get to that soon enough. May 17, 1963, Bruno Sammartino becomes champion. June 21, 1963, Pope from San Martino begins. Sammartino. San Martino. See. Easy. This gives us a powerful anchor as he clearly represented church authority. Sammartino was the second champion of the WWF. Given the first champ existed for only 1 month only to lose to Bruno, who lasted for a decade, it is clear Bruno was the intended king for the early rise of the WWF. This means the WWF's rise with Bruno achieved this feat through some form of cooperation with the clergy. This doesn't mean the WWF equals church, but that there was some form of partnership for decades. These networks have a long history with the CIA, but it goes back farther. This partnership does not necessarily exist permanently either. I learned digging today that Bruno left WWE in 1988 upset with McMahon and the direction taken towards drugs and vulgarity. Bruno Sammartino and McMahon's venomous 25-year feud. As soon as I read about this IRL feud today, I said this. I bet it ended with a new pope. February 2013, Pope Benedict ending after 8 years. February 2013, Bruno Sammartino ends feud with WWE by accepting Hall of Fame honors after rejecting it for years. March 2013, current pope starts. That's another perfect example of comms predicting comms. I demonstrate comms like this consistently in every post. If I were wrong about comms, I wouldn't be able to predict 2 different pope changes based on the choice of one wrestling name. There are millions of churches around the world and hundreds of thousands in the United States alone. Catholic Church owns 177 million acres of land. Most don't recognize the coordination that is often at the heart of these networks. Comms. Really, though, it's powerful and used frequently as a tool to shepherd the masses towards one end or another. Sometimes positive ends, other times, less so. Contrast that with pro wrestling, which often moves from place to place. This is much like its circus origins. They both have structures that could be complementary. They also fell out of favor in 1988. The given reasons were the increase in vulgarity and drugs. It was in the mid to late 90s where they embraced storylines involving addiction, necrophilia and castration. Why 88? I find this interesting given that's when Godfather 3 was in production. A film about fighting the corrupt elements in the Vatican. A film plagued with curses where the female lead had to be changed from Rebecca Schaefer due to murder by a so-called obsessed fan, the kind of thing MK Ops are made of. I took this to mean the film may have been intended as a marker for the efforts to clean up some of the networks the church was involved with. The murder being a message to stop moving in that direction. This is different than the prior films and perhaps why the third is looked back on poorly. At a surface level, the church accepting the WWF in the early 80s, the eat your vitamins and say your prayers era, but rejecting the next is shockingly wholesome in comparison to what I usually decode. But of course, even if it's a positive, there are still comms to dissect. Let's consider these era changes. What did Hulk Hogan symbolize? Hulk Hogan. Consider the name. Hulk is a play on the name of the superhero Hulk. Notice the Hulk TV debut around the same time. August 9, 1977. Hulk Hogan debut, Super Destroyer. November 4, 1977. The Incredible Hulk TV debut. Hulk is synonymous with destructive rage created from a nuclear blast. The show was famous for its ending sequence with the Hulk hitchhiking. This is meaningful with its debut in 1977 given my decodes of how MK data was moved around this time, and the original symbol to convey this was the monster, Carrie, hitchhiking. Specifically the data was tied to Fukushima, Japan. Comms of the meteorite found by Japan in the Allen Hills in 1977, the same name for the institute that had just come under scrutiny in 1977 in the MK hearings in August. August being when Hulk first wrestled. This is even more meaningful because Hogan first gained prominence in Japan around the same time he adopted the Hulk name. His trainer was also Japanese. So what then does this mean for Hulk as a comm? Well, we only have one half of his name so far. What about Hogan? 1970s. The name Hogan was synonymous with a popular show. Hogan's Heroes, a show about Hogan, a military column leader of a POW group under Nazis as they conducted espionage, spying from behind enemy lines and sabotage. This was a popular enough comedy to top ratings and achieve placement in many lists of top moments and top shows, as well as being parodied. Hulk equals monster created by science, MK. Hogan equals military commander behind enemy lines. What is his famous hairstyle? Handlebar mustache. As in, driving control, for Hulk. This is reinforced by his original manager who served in the Navy. This is different from his trainer which was Japanese. Notice his famous, 24-inch python's snake symbolism, which is a symbol of many people working as one. Same reason the church invokes it. Notice his actual name is Terry. Terry X2. This is important because it ties into a comm I've covered many times before but never connected a crucial dot on. No, not the Hulk Hogan connection, I haven't gotten to that yet. That connection makes an already impossible coincidence even more so. No, just by itself for whatever reason, Terry Bradshaw gave as a code name Tom Brady for arm surgery. If you don't know football, Terry Bradshaw was the top quarterback of his time and Tom Brady is the one that broke his record for most Super Bowl wins. For him to give that name, it defies all common sense, but of course it happened, and it was a comm. But what comm was it? In other posts I speculated that maybe Terry Bradshaw was announcing the person that would take over his comms. No. I was way off, it's always a comm tied to something going on at the time. So, what happened March 3, 1983 that required Terry Bradshaw to get arm surgery? March 3, 1983, Terry, Hulk Hogan, leaves the AWA to rejoin the WWF after being let go by Vince McMahon Sr. March 3, 1983, Terry Bradshaw uses code name Tom Brady for arm surgery. Terry being most famous for his arms at the time. The issue at heart with Hogan being forced out was whether or not WWF could do cross promotions. Hogan was fired for being in Rocky III. So he joined AWA the exact day of the Terry arm surgery. Now we understand. The comms were about fixing the WWF. Notice at the same time McMahon Sr. sold the WWF to Vince. And unlike the father, the son embraced cross promotions all over the place. It is a defining change he made and will become more and more important as you'll see through the post. Rocky comms in particular tied to cross promotion with Nintendo and Pro Wrestling, but let's stick to wrestling as much as possible. For the record, Tom Brady and Bradshaw comms are tied to Brady Disclosure. August 3, 1977, Tom Brady born. August 3, 1977, MK Ultra Hearing Senate. August 4, 1977, DOE begins, nuclear storage changes, Q clearance. All of this simply means Tom Brady's name was chosen to invoke the same thing Terry Bradshaw did. Terry called himself Tom to invoke the military cooperation with Hollywood that was going on at the time, but just check this post for more on that. Hogan was behind Bruno Sammartino in length of WWE title reign, but wrestling became popular under his watch. The nuclear connection to Hulk goes back to Bruno. December 17, 1959. UK Atomic Authority Act 1959. December 17, 1959. Bruno Sammartino pro debut through McMahon. The nuclear comms originate with the Nuclear McMahon Act, which led to the 1977 Q iteration. McMahon, which is the very same name synonymous with the WWE/WWF itself. The owner. Given the rise of Hulk Hogan as champion. How officially did he fall? The answer was the symbol of Japanese takeover in Yokozuna plus an exploding camera are what ended Hulk Hogan's run in the WWF. What did Japan represent to the WWF? June 13, 1993. King of the Ring Hulk loses belt to Yokozuna due to exploding camera. June 12, 1993. Eddie Guerrero vs Chris Benoit New Japan match where Benoit kicks Guerrero in head, and they become best friends till death 2 years apart. The Canadian crippler, Chris Benoit and the leader of the Latino World Order, Eddie Guerrero. Eddie died in 2005, Benoit died in 2007. Both had names and titles that represented locations. Chris Benoit was officially banned from ever being discussed in the WWE after he killed his family. When this tragedy happened, the WWE had just begun a story about McMahon having been murdered. A story they pretended was real, and some news outlets ran with it as real. Context is crucial, so before talking about Benoit we need to take a detour and talk about the events leading to Vince McMahon's murder. A story that got cancelled due to Benoit. It may just be an odd coincidence in subject matter. But it's worth mentioning that the day they had the tribute for Benoit, before learning it was a murder, it was originally meant to be a tribute for McMahon. Complete with casket. What would possess the creation of a story like this? Umaga vs Maga. The origins are from a WWE narrative I've decoded before. I just never bothered to read what happened after it. Vince was in a depressive breakdown due to losing the Battle of the Billionaires with Trump plus Bo Lashley. Trump had Bobby Lashley in his corner and McMahon had Umaga in his. The consequences of losing the match in 2007 was being shaved by the winner. Trump had last appeared at WrestleMania in 2004 also during a head-shaving match. Trump talks about politics with Jesse Ventura, the head shaving is a coincidence, and he doesn't mention it. What? Obviously not a coincidence, but what message is sent? That time Jesse Ventura asked Donald Trump for political support at WrestleMania. Moreover, it's worth noting that at that 2004 head-shaving WrestleMania, who was the big winner? Chris Benoit. He proceeds to hug his best friend Eddie Guerrero, who had just won the other major title of the night. 3 years later both men are dead. One by murder-suicide. This ties into my decode if you remember it, though I didn't decode Benoit or Guerrero at the time. What I did go over was the point of Trump talking about politics in 2004 during a head-shaving match, and then next returning in 2007 to shave the head of Vince Kennedy McMahon. The point is politics. A message being sent was to the then in power Bush administration about the next election. Notice they scheduled it for April Fool's Day. Remember that Vince McMahon was playing the villain in this. Vince McMahon picked Umaga to represent him and Trump picked Bobby Lashley. EW as in disgust of Maga, and Bo as in Barack Obama. This is why the competition is of a handsome black man versus an ugly Texan. Bush symbol. Notice his name is literally the guy who was the captain of the Titanic. The world's most famous sinking ship. And famous murder. Having an ugly Umaga as candidate on April Fools was sending a message of what would happen if they ran a candidate. Telling them to not bother starting. Let Obama win, his numbers were already at historic lows. Bush approval rating drops to 27%. Vince Kennedy McMahon worked as a symbol for Bush partially because of his dynamic as evil CEO with his son Shane. Reconcile with the defining characteristics of Bush. His father was the former POTUS. Notice in the match how his son Shane gets involved. Vince's middle name, Kennedy, may also be relevant given how JFK's son ended up in 1999. In either case, the symbol for both is a doomed political run should they choose to take it. This also ties into who was to run. Jeb had been prepped. They waited until 2016 to run him, but these comms suggest an earlier run may have been considered. It ties into the other message that night at WrestleMania as well. Notice directly after the Trump hair-cutting match, the next match was Melina, i.e. Melania, defeating another girl for the Women's Championship. This is likely a symbol for Slovenia control. In 2001, Bush talks warmly about their independence with congratulations. Slovenia equals a location that was independent in 1993-2001, but by 2004 got sucked into the EU under Merkel. 2004 equals Slovenia joins EU. 2004 equals Trump proposes to Melania, Slovenia. Control comms. 2004, Apprentice first aired. 2005, Marriage to Melania Trump. 2005, Access Hollywood blackmail with Billy Bush. Donald does what he is told. Helping Donald run his lines, same night he famously screwed himself by saying offensive things on Access Hollywood tapes equals blackmail. Trump was supposed to be the pro equals the third-party candidate to split the vote. Instead, Assange, is there a word for what has happened to the United States? Where the puppet takes over the hand? Great news. But let's stick with wrestling. What other political comms have been sent under the WWE? Might there have been some for the current administration? Kamala Harris X2. Ever hear of Kamala Harris? No, not that one. There is another. Kamala Harris, that just so happens to have been a pro wrestler in the WWE and just so happens to have died right before the election. I owe this fine to my readers. Kamala Harris, the wrestler, famous villain who joined the WWF in 1984 and began a feud with Hulk Hogan and Andre for the championship. What did the comm mean back then? Comms get re-invoked all the time, so, what if it meant the same thing? What was Kamala Harris? First female vice president. When did that happen before? July 19, 1984. Geraldine Ferraro becomes the first ever female nominee for vice president. +1. July 20, 1984. Kamala Harris debut WWF. She begins by comparing her achievement to MLK. It's even more clear as a connection given when Kamala Harris left. November 1984. Election, first female VP candidate loses. November 1984. Kamala Harris leaves the WWF. Leaves the stage same month the female VP left the minds of people. No longer a candidate, no longer relevant. Why would they send a comm about a white female VP using a man whose entire persona is built around being ugly and mean? Same point of Umaga. A symbol for someone ugly and mean. The comms show a coordination of demonization and possibly even an intentional throwing of a race. Notice the crowd chant. Same as Jerry Springer, it's possible, not clear yet, that famous crowd chant he married to trashy scandal invoked her as its origin. As in what he does is meant to coordinate what they did then again. Kamala Harris the VP has the same name as this already existing celebrity named Kamala Harris. A comm I just showed was tied to the original female running mate. So she was likely molded as a public figure to invoke the same comm. We can further confirm this connection by looking at Kamala's return to fame. Notice he retired and came back in 2004, the same year Kamala Harris began her career as an elected official. The event they chose to bring Kamala Harris, the wrestler, back on. Diva Search. Notice the segment where pretty girls had to seduce an obese old man command. Likely the point to this message was in relaying that Kamala Harris wouldn't be a problem as the DA of San Francisco. Letting sex criminals feel at ease. It doubles as a comm defining her as a new star. I suspect these comms were invoked so as to have her be a part of a losing ticket to the White House in the future. Kamala translates to horrible. The point as a symbol then is just like Umaga, a character meant to define the grotesque. It's a clever way to carve out a niche in politics as most would sooner go for the big job. Ironically, she got that big job, but then that's because the plan involved having a win by cheating. Biden may have won, but it had to be that way. The examples show WWE sends comms for politics. Given this, all I have to do is look at some of the biggest political moments and see what wrestling was doing. For example, recall WWE comms tied to Trump acting as Perot 2.0. What about Perot 1.0? What did Perot end up doing with those multitudes of volunteers that got his name on the ballot? January 11, 1993, WWF Monday Night Raw debut, the biggest show in WWF. January 13, 1993, Ross Perot transforms his political campaign following into a monthly payment plan. Notice the very first place they choose to visit when they left New York. Bushkill, Pennsylvania. Perot delivered the presidency to Clinton, and we can learn much in dissecting which parties supported and coordinated this. Don't misunderstand though, politics is not the only kind of comms pushed on pro wrestling. Here's a comm I dug up today. One of the most famous fictional couples in WWE history. Chyna XXX. Chyna and Eddie "Gory" Guerrero. What was the comm in creating this storyline? Context is crucial for Decodes. At the time Eddie Guerrero was playing a villain. Even when babyface, a crucial part of his stories tie to his drug addiction and criminal past. His catchphrase is, "I lie, I cheat, I steal," and his merchandise invokes drug kingpin Scarface. Now contrast that with Chyna. Chyna is famous. Her large masculine bodybuilder physique is unique in a sea of slender, though very athletic, models. She is also famous for her Playboy stints. These happened during her time as Eddie's girlfriend, and this translated into story where Eddie supported Chyna fighting censors. Put all those symbols together, and what do you get as a message? Let's look at the timeline for the answer. November 2000, Chyna nudes released by Playboy. Plus 1 year. November 12, 2001, Eddie Guerrero released from jail for drunk driving. November 12, 2001, Live Jasmine pornography site launches, among the top trafficked and award-winning porn sites. November 2001, Chyna leaves WWE. Clear message, now to translate. Eddie allowed out of jail for dangerous driving, timed to the porn site launch equals the new driver, i.e. pornography. The point of pairing her with a criminal drug addict thief gives justification. The symbol with Chyna as a porn model with massive arms equals strength of push. This is similar to a number of other comms I've deconstructed, so I recognized it right away. May 25, 2007, Pornhub launches second biggest adult website ever made in Montreal, screw job. May 26, 2007, top MMA Chuck Liddell loses championship and then loses every fight except one for rest of career. These porn sites addict many away from productive lives, and the justification given is as a goal to addict the productivity from criminals. Big arm symbolism with Chyna equals strength. Strength plus pornography equals the new porn site is powerful. An announcement to the world. Of course that's their justification on pushing porn. Be careful about taking their word, just because a comm asserts it doesn't make it correct, it merely informs intent. I doubt the porn industry is in constant efforts to keep only criminals tethered to addiction. Furthermore, reconcile the psychological push. The top star in the company at its height beat up authority while trash talking. He also often drank beer after beer thrown from the audience as a gimmick. Much of the audience is underage. This is what kids should strive to become. This brings us to John Cena. 2-pack and 6-pack. The biggest star of the WWE modern era and famous for bringing in children to the WWE fandom. What does it mean to him to be a kid's role model? A white rapper with a backwards baseball cap. He rose to the top in 2005 and a song from his 2005 album, The Time Is Now, has been his ring music from then until now. Note the lyrics, using the word boy. And, I brush your mouth like Colgate. Very cringe for an adult, but there's something important when looking at how kids see it. The clue that solved what's going on with this guy is his fame is built around his phrase, you can't see me. You can't see me, it's his ring music, his catchphrase, his taunt, it's his identity. What does it mean to invoke it? I searched that phrase, but I didn't just find John Cena, I found another rapper. Reconcile the two symbols and the answer is clear. 2-packs, Can't See Me, was a song made to insult people who appropriate his style. As in exactly what John Cena did by invoking his title, but it works doubly well because he is a parody of a rapper. WWE audience is primarily white and male and Cena is famous for being an icon to kids. The more Cena was pushed, the more imitated a parody of a black rapper became. This is one of many psychological pushes in the world and the WWE carved out a niche. If you've ever wondered how certain perplexing types of people come to be, this is how. Similar to the My Little Pony comms I went over here. Both are directed towards the same young plus male demographic. In both cases the comms demonstrate an intent to mold psyches. That's not to say I'm against men liking My Little Pony shows or white people rapping. My issue is not with the act, it's the intent reconciled with results. Without comms you can't ever hope to understand the intent. In fact, you aren't allowed to question anything even without comms. I can say what I say, but how many see it? The microphones are only given to those that follow the narrative. People naturally adapt to environments. Even if we are allowed free will, our environment may mold us into something grotesque without us even noticing it. Think about accents as an example of this and how hard it is to get rid of one. Did you choose to talk like that? Conversely, our environment could guide us to real strength and wisdom, if only the will was there. The problem is the will was in the other direction. The WWF only overtook WCW when they embraced the Attitude Era, the era promoting sex and booze. The Attitude Era began when WrestleMania headlined rapist Mike Tyson as special guest. The famous turning point of the WCW versus WWF ratings wars. Mankind. That would be the night Mankind was made world champion by Stone Cold Steve Austin's interference. This was the night WWF overtook the WCW in ratings for the first time in years, and there are many odd things about it. WCW inexplicably hyped up the event on air. This caused 600,000 people to switch the channel. Why would they do that? The official reason is they spoiled the results frequently of the WWF, but of course if that were the case they would leave every night. No, this was intentional. It's all in the presentation. Especially that night. The intention becomes clear when you realize WCW had their famously anticlimactic finger poke of doom moment. So while one program delivered their best, the other had their worst. Notice the story of a miscarriage was also that night. Highlighted in blue. What is the point of raising up Mankind to the top? This is a character defined by schizophrenia and bloody matches. Making him the top the moment WWF beat WCW, this moment is meaningful. Voted best Raw moment of all time. After 2 more years WCW was bought out by WWF. The WCW decided to destroy its brand to facilitate a takeover. This is apparent when you look at the interim. E.g. a fake heart attack by Ric Flair. It mirrored an old scandal that killed wrestling viewership. Why copy a moment that was famous specifically for killing ratings? Because the point was to kill ratings. Goldberg and Sting's bat. Why did the WCW have the infamous finger poke of doom? The official answer is Goldberg accidentally injured himself after he forgot his baseball bat and was forced to use his hands to destroy the limo of Bret the Hitman Hart. This Doom connection to Hitman reminds me of how Doom was used not long before this. But the key is Goldberg losing his bat. These comms tell us everything we need to know to understand the reason WCW killed itself for TakeOver. Goldberg equals money. Outside of Hulk Hogan, he was the top paycheck. So the symbol is there. Gold got injured, and the real clue is his lost baseball bat. Baseball bat has a specific meaning tied to WCW because their entire brand was built by Sting, who famously used a baseball bat. Until the NWO story, Sting was their top. Thus Goldberg losing the baseball bat is a clue as to why the change needed to happen. Why bat? Baseball is a symbol I've decoded in many posts, and it represents the companies that coordinate using sports. Goldberg losing the bat leading to WWF takeover is because companies behind WCW wanted WCW gone. This lines up with history perfectly. WCW equals Ted Turner equals Time Warner. And at the time the AOL Time Warner deal was underway. AOL Time Warner wanted WCW gone. Thus, as stated, the baseball bat was no longer available. No longer a way for Goldberg to go after the Hitman. Read that article closely. I decoded this before knowing the finer details, and you can see my decode lines up perfectly. AOL Time Warner wanted WCW gone ASAP. Ted Turner was the financial backing of WCW, and with the merger he was removed from decision-making. Thus the baseball bat, which was also the gold, was gone, and these were the comms sent, so comms-aware people understood why WCW suddenly decided to kill itself with a fake heart attack, the fingerpoke of doom, and other intentionally unappealing moments. Right after Ted Turner was kicked out of making decisions. January 1999. Fingerpoke of Doom kills WCW ratings. February 1999. Ted Turner apologizes to Pope for racist joke. Turner forced to humiliate himself after losing power. The ops moving from WCW to WWF at the time was also likely noted in football. January 3, 1999. The Catch NFL game Green Bay Packers vs 49ers. January 4, 1999. Finger Poke of Doom, WCW sends 600K viewers to WWF. January 4, 1999. WWF Mankind Championship. Green Bay Packers equals symbol of new employment. WWF made itself edgier, possibly to accommodate the ops from WCW. Putting a schizophrenic on top, Mankind, using an alcoholic, Stone Cold, was a way to open the arms, because until the Attitude Era, which began by elevating a rapist, they were the less edgy of the two. WCW overtook the WWF with the bigger contracts by Ted Turner. The symbol of the undefeated Goldberg was of money being the winner. Ted Turner had more than WWF, until Ted Turner was kicked out of supplying it. WCW was a money sink after all, losing year after year in revenue to buy up WWF stars. It translated into a Pyrrhic victory. December 27, 1998. Goldberg's first loss after 173 wins. December 19, 1999. Goldberg injures Hitman, ends career. December 23, 1999. Goldberg injured self chasing Hitman forces Fingerpoke of Doom story. December 29, 1999. WWE Mankind wins belt from Rock, aired January 4. As the WCW stripped WWF of its biggest stars with big contracts, the McMahon responded with the infamous Montreal Screwjob to take Bret Hart's title from him before leaving to WCW. Bret Hitman Hart, Heart Attack finisher, began at the WCW the same day of the announcement of the Attitude Era. The announcement involved asserting themselves to be done with the "take your vitamins and say your prayers" era. Embracing Jerry Springer and MTV. Jerry Springer being a show famous at the time for episodes about men having sex with horses and children that can't keep their clothes on. December 15, 1997. Hitman Bret Hart WCW debut after Montreal Screwjob. December 15, 1997. WWF Chairman Vince McMahon announces the introduction of the Attitude Era. December 16, 1997. Porygon seizure episode. This potential connection is interesting because. Define Hitman. December 15, 1997. Flight 3183 UAE crash 85 dead. December 16, 1997. Pokemon Porygon seizure episode 700 kids hospitalized. December 17, 1997. Flight 241 Greece crash 70 dead, second highest fatality rate in Greece history at the time. December 19, 1997. Flight 185 Indonesia crash 104 dead. The story that WCW beat WWF with. NWO, Own Outsiders. The Outsiders, Invasion. Story began with the Invasion, an event where Scott Hall and Kevin Nash invaded the WCW as the Outsiders. Hall and Nash had been top cards at WWF but went to WCW for more money and freedom power in deciding matches. Outsiders, that's an interesting choice for a name. I suspect it was meant to invoke The Outsiders film by Francis Ford Coppola. Godfather. It starred Ralph Macchio in the film he did before The Karate Kid. A film credited with popularizing karate for kids. NWO was managed by someone synonymous with karate. It is discussed in most articles where Bischoff is a subject and in most broadcasts I've seen with him in it. Bischoff is credited with being the core of the decisions that led to WCW overtaking WWF with Ted Turner's wallet. The point with invoking karate is in a partnership with Japanese cells. 1984 Karate Champ inspires Street Fighter Top arcade game. 1984 Karate Kid inspires karate dojos to pop up across country. Both act as boons to Japanese industry inside USA. Outsiders gives the cipher with Macchio, Karate Kid, playing a character with abusive parents who helps his friends by murdering someone attempting to drown the main character. He takes the rap for it before dying. These are MK comms. The money that came in for karate dojos and arcades was a result of the Hollywood push that popularized fighting. The ops paying for that promotion is detailed in the comms. Scott Hall as an outsider in relation is meaningful. His character Razor was tied to addiction. The NWO began with defections of the top stars from the WWF that were called the Clique, as they had a ton of power in the WWF at the time. This tells me that they likely were faces to coordinate ops. Notice one was in drug rehab at the time of switching. That one was Six-Pac, the sixth member of the NWO. September 16, 1996. X-Pac Six-Pac debut NWO. September 13, 1996. Tupac Shakur death after being shot at his friend Mike Tyson's last heavyweight victory days prior. Remember Tyson equals start of Attitude Era. He was also the only IRL boss of Street Fighter. Bison Tyson. Changed in the US version because of just how obvious it was. The NWO invasion is a calm of insurgency. The inspiration is said to have been from Bischoff, who modeled it on two Japanese pro wrestling outlets with a similar war. I suspect the invasion was a new coordination from US cells with Japan cells. New Japan, ECW, SNK. The comms were tied to New Japan Pro Wrestling events therefore. January 13, 1972. New Japan Pro Wrestling. January 13, 1972. Clockwork Orange debut. There are probably no movies more synonymous with MK than this. Overseas act as eyes on ops to keep it away from law. This back and forth with the WWF also was tied to the ECW as both outlets partnered with it during the rivalry. In fact, the inspiration for the Attitude Era was said to be the most famous moment from the ECW, which positioned itself as the most extreme of the three. The day they became extreme. August 27, 1994. NWA turns into ECW as Shane Douglas. August 27, 1994. Chris Benoit debut ECW. Benoit, Canadian crippler, joins same day. What kind of cell cooperation might this be? Obvious question and obvious answer coming up. Who did Benoit marry? How are marriages used in comms? May 17, 1964. Canada's Tim Hortons founded. May 17, 1964. Nancy Benoit born. Tim Hortons is the biggest fast food chain in Canada. Uniquely Canadian tied to pro hockey. This means yes, shockingly the wrestler called the Canadian Crippler is a symbol for Canada. Pro hockey origin in Tim Horton is a symbol of the cells in play. Thus ECW being the start of the Attitude Era is meaningful as ECW began cooperating with pro hockey cells in Canada. This inspired other mergers until they all came under McMahon. We can see these merger comms from another angle by going back to fighting games. Street Fighter II wasn't the only one around after all. August 25, 1994. SNK, King of Fighters debut, game merging many fighting games into one. August 27, 1994. NWA becomes ECW as Shane Douglas throws away title. August 27, 1994. Chris Benoit debut ECW. Debut of a fighting game tied to many other fighting games coming together. The character select involves picking teams representing countries to fight one another. Main star of the fighting games merged. Origin tied to Street Fighter, which itself was inspired by Karate Champ. The person behind this game was behind the original Street Fighter. The character's origin is in punching through a wall in 1987. Reminds me of the Berlin Wall/Tetris comms of the same timeframe. Remember the Chris Benoit marriage comm? August 12, 1987. Street Fighter I debut. August 17, 1987. Shane Douglas marries. August 24, 1994. Shane Douglas divorces. August 27, 1994. Shane Douglas throws away NWA title rebrands as ECW. August 27, 1994. Chris Benoit joins ECW. This connection with fighting games promotes both as people become interested in both watching and playing fights. Much like how Karate Kid/Karate Champ led to both Street Fighter and karate dojos across the country. People behind Mortal Kombat did a WrestleMania game. It's billed as from the Hitman personally. Not long before he left to WCW. Final day was the Montreal Screwjob. McMahon took the belt by forcing a false count before he left. The endings for this game reveal a bit. Characters' stories conclude with gang rape, Shawn Michaels, depression, alcoholism, Razor Ramon, mass murder of innocents, Bam Bam, and in Yokozuna's case the complete destruction of America by attacking the culture. But let's return to that famous Canadian Montreal Screwjob of Bret Hitman Hart. That was not the only time I came across that phrase in my research on this. Turns out McMahon did the same thing years before to the women's champion Wendy Richter using Moolah. Digging into the relationship and history of Wendy Richter and Moolah, a surprising amount of darkness is made public in books. Wendy was the student of Moolah and Moolah acted as a sex trafficking pimp, torturer, and drug pusher. These are disputed claims of course. Wendy's fame stemmed from a storyline WWF ran with involving Cyndi Lauper. This was the first big cross promotion that began after ousting Vince McMahon Sr., covered early in post. Rock plus Wrestling, WrestleMania 1. A celebrity described as the Britney Spears of the 80s that feuded with Lou Albano and Moolah on air. This feud was a major part of the first WrestleMania and one other major event. That other event being The Brawl to End It All, an MTV special. The most watched program in the history of MTV. That's a big deal, pulling audiences into a network. Cooperation with a music star to cross-promote both. The story involves Cyndi Lauper choosing Wendy to represent her in a fight against Lou Albano and Moolah. Notice Lou Albano starred in Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun video. Lou Albano is famous for playing the original Super Mario in the 80s. The original Super Mario, Lou Albano also co-starred with Wendy in a popular cartoon about pro wrestling. September 14, 1985. Rock and Wrestling Cartoon, Wendy/Lou Albano. September 13, 1985. Super Mario Bros. Debut. Rock and Wrestling gives us a cipher. Two different entities promoting one another. This is a cipher likely reused over time to denote two factions. Even when both are in the WWE, the meaning, given Mankind symbolizing a psychopath, is likely different. Rock being from the same school as Yokozuna. The Lou Albano connection suggests a cooperation with the video game industry as well. Albano starred in Cyndi Lauper's Girls Just Want to Have Fun. October 14, 1983. Girls Just Want to Have Fun album. October 14, 1983. Infamous Namco/Midway Ms. Pac-Man agreement to pay royalties. That last connection with Girls Just Want to Have Fun is particularly meaningful in relation to Ms. Pac-Man because a famous thing about Pac-Man was that it had the highest ratio of any game to that point of female players. In fact, it was designed for women. And that lawsuit is famous because Ms. Pac-Man, with a mole, became a cultural icon, and likely important symbol. Yet despite this Namco killed it due to the contract. I suspect this contract was a cooperation of entities, and just like the Pope falling out of favor with the WWF around the same time, so two other factions ended relationships. What I find particularly interesting with this is these comms clearly represented a cooperation with Hollywood. Nintendo went on to continue to dominate, but Namco went from top of the industry with Ms. Pac-Man and Frogger at the time to only relevant in Japan for over a decade. I suspect this is why. His shared interest in industries was clearly true in the case of MTV and WWF as MTV got record ratings. And these connections with Nintendo and Namco suggest both were using comms tied to entertainment industry to make deals to promote games. Given all these connections, what then might Wendy have represented? I find it curious Tim Hortons was bought by Wendy's. That's a guess based on the name of course, but as we keep seeing these entities overlap it's plausible. Especially given comms of Wendy in relation to Moolah. Moolah was the teacher of Wendy, and it was said she acted as a pimp for young girls. The official story of Wendy is in the code name for an 8-year-old girl that can't identify herself. Anonymity. This connection is even stronger when we consider the most famous partner of Moolah was Mae Young. Someone that returned with her on many broadcasts over the years because money plus young girl as a symbol seems to be important. Mae Young plus Mark Henry. Moreover, Mae Young had an infamously disgusting story tied to Mark Henry. A story where the senior citizen gets pregnant to the 1996 Olympic champion Mark Henry. And gives birth to a hand. No explanation is ever given for why she gave birth to a hand. Mae Young comes to the ring in Mark Henry's Hardcore Champion match to jump on top of a man named Hardcore. She goes into labor and gives birth to a hand while smoking a cigar. This causes people to puke and then give her a hand by applause. Mark Henry was billed as the world's strongest man and became famous in the 1996 Summer Olympics, which is where McMahon gave him a then unheard of 10-year contract. They brought back the hand the same week of the 2012 Summer Olympics, so there is a likely connection in this. The story of Mark Henry impregnating Young was part of his sexual chocolate persona where he billed himself as a sex addict. September 30, 1999. Mark Henry confesses sex addiction and as a child had sex with sister, and had sex with her again 2 days ago, also courted Chyna. September 30, 1999. Japan's worst nuclear accident to date. Nuclear accident comms tied to the admissions. This was likely messaging tied to something that was at a risk of going public. The subject matter a warning of sorts. But what does it mean? One great way to solve many comms is by paying attention to the sequences. In this case, just before the hand birth scene, Chyna shoves her fist into Perry Saturn's crotch. Perry Saturn, Moppy, and Pepe. Perry Saturn. Perry is sometimes used to denote ops opening a foreign territory, like Admiral Perry did in Japan. October 27, 1990. Perry Saturn debut. October 29, 1990. GM Saturn Time magazine goal of competing with Japanese imports and transplants. His initials, PS, is a symbol for communicating discreetly. And his last name, Saturn, can denote rings, as in a control. His most famous gimmick was Moppy, after suffering brain injuries that made him incoherent. Moppy was widely believed to have been a punishment gimmick for hurting a wrestler named Mike Bell. What's interesting about this is Mike Bell would die years later from a heart attack brought on by inhaling cleaning products made for computers. Easy to connect mops and cleaning products, but actually this is a bit of a red herring. I suspect his death symbol was more tied to his own comms than anything Perry Saturn ever did. This is because Mike Bell, of course, is a comms name, as Mike is well established as a microphone comm and Bell is an established symbol for phone/internet and often tied to surveillance. Ma Bell origins. I can solve Moppy though, by using another similar case. This gimmick with Perry Saturn as mentally handicapped and dating a mop reminds me of another gimmick tied to Chavo Guerrero, Pepe. Acting equally mentally handicapped, it was given as an excuse by Eddie for not being allowed to join the Latino World Order variant of NWO. The Pepe plot line climaxed with its destruction using a wood chipper. This is the exact same fate to befall Perry Saturn's Moppy. What makes this particularly curious is how Perry Saturn connects to it. The episode with Pepe and the wood chipper involves Perry Saturn being forced to wear a dress by Jericho. Recall the humiliation comm with the exact same setup, Saturn with Chyna punching him in the groin. It was a Jericho match, same people same acts. Pepe was introduced as an emotional crutch for Chavo during the final days of the WCW. I suspect given Chavo's humiliation it represented in a micro comm the larger macro humiliations of WCW as they tried to push people to the WWF brand. After being destroyed, Pepe was put into an urn and the ashes were thrown in Chavo's face, humiliating him over and over. Everything was meant to tell the audience to stop caring about WCW. Doing this mitigated upset fans at the upcoming buyout. With that in mind, especially Perry Saturn's humiliations. Moppy was a symbol of cleanup in 2001. March 26, 2001. WWE buys WCW. June 19, 2001. Perry Saturn Moppy debut. Think about how many changes were required to merge brands. How many wrestlers are there all in long soap opera stories? When you have the right solution, the puzzle pieces tend to fit like that. It also gives us a Pepe symbol origin. The symbol of being relaxed in the face of shock. WCW WWF could have gone differently with millions of WCW fans rejecting and ending viewership. I solved this as I wrote the post. Take note of what I got right and wrong at the start. I wasn't wrong about the symbol of Perry as new territory, it meant switching from WCW to WWF. I was wrong when guessed it had to do with cleanup of surveillance. It was all about merging fan bases with minimal losses. If you pay attention to stuff like this, you might be able to better comprehend critical thinking, smiley face. I kept trying, maybe this. Maybe that. Nothing fit, but I tracked pattern after pattern, and once I had the right answer it became 100% clear, all the pieces worked. What solved it was reconciling oddities in timing of Chavo and Pepe plus Perry Saturn to Perry Saturn and Moppy. Way too many correlations to be coincidence, and then I realized the big story at the time was the WCW WWF. Of course that's what they would send comms about. So it was a very light comm, not about blackmail or MK, but plenty of comms are. Blackmail/MK are often the big pushes behind the scenes to take over cells. September 16, 1965, Manchurian Candidate TV debut. September 17, 1965, Hogan's Heroes TV show. 17 equals Q equals secrecy. Manchurian Candidate equals brainwash. Karate Kid cross promotion plus ops. This ties to the Karate Kid as I mentioned earlier. In this film, one of the first things that happens is a fellow teen played by Israel, i.e. Mossad in apartment 17/Q introduces himself. Mother got a computer job and had to move there. The point being surveillance on MK as they are conditioned. The primary conflict of the film begins with a teen named Johnny Law trying to get a rich girl to go out with him. Rejected, he breaks her radio and the Karate Kid defends her. Symbol of different cells at war. This is something MK facilitates. A way for rich cells to attack other cells that try and force their way in. The rich girl that acts as his motivation is named Ollie plus Mills. Creating fighters. The primary villain Martin Kove being another cell. Cobra Kai, Snake being many people working as one. Notice he co-starred with the Incredible Hulk on the series debut as a fighter named Rocky. A fighter who inspired by Rocky the film decided to become a boxer. This parallels the reaction of the Karate Kid. As in, it was to do the same thing Rocky did for boxing. As in inspire people all over the world to begin watching boxing matches and learning how. A boon for the industry. The industry boons are the surface results, the comms dictate what goes on underneath. Creating fighters. Pumpkin carving equals scare ops. Notice he intentionally compares Okinawa to being in between Japan plus China. This China plus Japan angle ties into his history. His teacher Miyagi is an important choice as he was famously the owner of the diner in Happy Days. Once again half Chinese and half Japanese. I go over it here. The Jump episodes of Fonzie. In exchange for the publicity of Fonzie jumps for his diner, Mr. Miyagi, Arnold, helps the gang. The point of those comms was, Jump represented moving the data offshore. This also involved Japanese game companies. September 22, 1975. Enix founded. September 23, 1975. Fearless Fonzie equals Fonzie breaks world record jumping trash cans. The same is true of Karate Ops. Miyagi sends the Karate Kid after the rich girl in a polka dot, sitcom, bath chic costume. Symbol of sickness for the girl, and this leads to him taking revenge on the men harassing both of them. Sneaks up on them and leads to car crash. The Cobra Kai wear skeleton costumes as that's a comm for a structural framework. A variant of snake comms, many working as one. Where did Spider-Man go after Miyagi helps him? A play on the symbol for someone spying and interfering. The spy comms tie to Japan, and so in wrestling the Japan wrestler that took the championship from Hulk Hogan was Yokozuna. The WrestleMania with Yokozuna as the main card had Burt Reynolds as the announcer. Burt Reynolds in relation to Japan is a big one if you've read this post. The point of which was in moving data to Japan, so it couldn't be intercepted by law enforcement. Cross-promotion, Robocop plus wrestling. These cooperative ops pro wrestling has with Hollywood are extensive. Here's one where Robocop freed Sting from a steel cell. Promotion of Robocop 2. What was the point in this one? June 21, 1990, Super Nintendo announced. June 22, 1990, Robocop 2 debut. This implies Robocop 1 was a symbol of the original NES. Let's test that theory. Trailer involves Robocop knocking over an arcade. Something Nintendo did as it brought the arcade to the house. But much more clear than that is the iconography. Notice the script line. We aren't planning to build a toy, this was also in the trailer. Just like with the arcade crashing, it's hinting at what's going on and what will be going on. Why Robocop though? What does Nintendo have to do with a robotic cop? The answer to that comes from the inspiration for the franchise. The origin was Judge Dredd. The original model for Robocop was a one-to-one likeness for the character. It came out alongside the Atari 2600. Atari was tied to the ops of Studio 54. These ops were about creating blackmail for celebrities. In effect, they acted as the police if they did anything wrong. Dread the Judge. Japan took over those ops for Mossad, as I decoded in several places. If this hypothesis is true, then what does it mean when Judge Dredd had a bad movie? 1995. Same time Atari crashed after retrying their hand at a console again. Notice Robocop was written alongside another project about the CIA involvement in the Contras that was planned to be released for election time. Eventually cancelled. This is because a deal was made to throw for the election. Cooperation instead of war between sides. One last note about Robocop 2. It pays homage to Nintendo's role in breaking down the Berlin Wall. 1989 November, Tetris, Russian wall game, released for Nintendo after negotiations with Russian Gov. 1989 November, Berlin Wall falls. June 22, 1990, Robocop 2. June 22, 1990, Berlin Wall, Checkpoint Charlie removed, most famous location at the wall. Check my other posts to learn about their history in that. Here's one I didn't finish solving. August 22, 1987, Humperdinck debut WWE appointed as manager. September 25, 1987, Princess Bride released, villain equals Prince Humperdinck. Co-starring, Boulder, Terry, throwing Andre as co-star hero. November 26, 1987, Survivor Series, Humperdinck story finale as manager at PPV. Updates. Not much room for updates this week, but I know it's what some want most, so let's go over a big one. 66 is always a day to watch for. I don't know golf all that well, but to my eyes this is an entire sport changing ownership. Saudi-backed. Salman of course, and that is huge. 2017 Saudi Arabia in terrorism fight with Trump touches orb. 2017 Saudi Arabia prince buys orb-focused savior of the world from Russian oligarch, the highest price ever for a painting. 2017 Saudi Arabia arrests billionaire Al-Walid in sweeping anti-corruption purge. Golf is probably going to be the next sport I try and tackle. I've only decoded small parts of it so far, but like all other sports it clearly has a massive role in funding ops. The winning green shirts in particular evoke more ties to money, and of all sports it has the richest audience. So this might be a huge change in ops management globally. I spent a few minutes digging into the CEO of this Live Golf. Notice the wife Chris Evert. This is a famous tennis player and marriage date. June 27, 2008, Wally. June 28, 2008, Chris Evert Greg Norman wedding. Wally, and if you've read my decode on that, was a calm for Walid. As in Saudi Arabia ops back in 2008. This suggests Saudi Arabia was using Gulf comms at the time. The marriage to Chris is likely a symbol of church cooperation. Chris equals Christ. These comms tied to buyouts are all over the place, and if I hadn't been decoding for years now it would convince me as of some kind of foreign takeover, but it's all doing what needs to be done to put things right. You remember SNK, right? The comms tied to mergers of ops. Don't forget what Q said about who has the money. Top left. It almost seems like a foregone conclusion now given where the money/military was back in 2017. The problems of course were a wide array of businesses that even today not all seem to be cooperating in trying to take out future court cases by funding resistances and murder. They pay for such things with crypto, and that's why that industry has been something like a final boss, as I've come to view it. That's why it's interesting that alongside the Gulf merger something else big happened. June 6, 2023, US steps up crackdown on crypto with lawsuits against Coinbase, Binance. The endgame may not be moving as fast as we all hoped back in 2017, but make no mistake it has long been moving forward. How on earth did they manage to take over an industry sports league without creating a disaster in the mainstream media? What possible distraction would be big enough for that? Yes, that one. You can see when he bought SNK there was a backlash, and while there has been some small burbles for the golf change, everything in the mainstream media is laser focused on the distraction story. That's the point, and it also sends comms about, "This is you," for people soon to be facing jail time. Note Musk's reply about equal applications. His feed is a great one right now to get a great overview of what's going on with free speech. All while these distractions are played, he is opening every door to free speech, and we have these legacy powers being changed from the top one after another. We are getting there. Just have to make sure we are ready for whatever is to come. That's what I do every week, and if you read my work that's what you are here for as well. Getting as aware as possible, so we can help out lifting this world out of darkness into a great new age, smiley face. Course that only applies for people healthy in other ways. Which is my way of saying for any that have addictions or bad habits, this is your excuse to kick them ASAP. You never know who might be watching. Telegram chat. Join the Decoding blog Telegram group. Begin decoding. Send leads. This has been Pro Wrestling Decoded.